Hello everyone, and welcome to our Bible quest here at Bethany Christian Church. We're right in the book, the end of Samuel, and we're right into the book of Kings now. And like Samuel, which is now presented to us as two books, it was really one. And the same is going to be true of the book of Kings, but we will go a certain degree on into 2 Kings. But first we have the end of the book of Samuel, which is really concerned mostly with the death of Absalom and David's attempt to befriend his own children and his domestic problems. But we are given the story of his terrible grief over the death of Absalom. And then we find that David, after this terrible incident, tries to reorganize the whole kingdom of Israel, both the north and the south. He lives, of course, in Judah, and the northern kingdom, when we think of it, we mean Israel. The southern kingdom, we mean Judah. But he is trying to bring both of them together, and he is better at statecraft than he is at domestic relations, but even here, he has a great deal of difficulty. Then, in the latter part of David, we get a couple of sort of relieving incidents. One, we get two songs of praise. Remember, David is the sweet singer of all of the Israelites. And we have two of his songs there that are very much psalm-like, like the book of Psalms. And they're very much a part of David praising and thanking God for the success that he has had. Unfortunately, though, we're near the end of the life of David, and in his latter days, we find that he is trying to get this reorganization, but not being very successful with it. Anyway, as we prepare for the death of David, we first hear who his officials were. We get some chapters that show who his mighty men were, and particularly his officials. Now, these passages are not very exciting to read. They're mostly just lists of the names of these men, but they do show David and his family and who he was. And so that brings us down to the end of the book of Samuel and gets us ready for the book of Kings. And it's the book of Kings that actually has the death of David and the naming of Solomon as the new king after his death. Now, those are very interesting chapters right at the beginning of 1 Kings, because what happens is David has a talk with Solomon. There's a little bit of a story about how Solomon gets to be named king for sure. His mother, Bathsheba, comes and talks to David, and we're glad to see her again after a number of chapters that we had not seen her. Of course, she's an older woman by then. Anyway, her son Solomon is indeed made king. David then talks to Solomon, and he says to him the same things that has been heard before and again, going clear back to Moses, that if the people will be faithful to God's ways, if they will follow in that upright path and not be following after the gods of other nations, success will be possible. But that is very good advice, and certainly Solomon takes that very seriously. The only thing that sort of negates it is then David and Solomon talk about how are we going to get rid of the people who might threaten your kingship, and they planned the murder of Adonijah and others right there, and Solomon indeed goes along with that as well. But we do then have Solomon named king, and we get a number of aspects and really exciting parts of Solomon's reign. One, we get the story of his asking God for wisdom. And that wisdom turns out to be, and there are a number of stories associated with it, and they're quite good, that show that he indeed has that ability. And he is better, again, at dealing with family tricks and family situations better than statecraft, whereas his father was better at statecraft, and Solomon was better with the family reigns. Anyway, the big thing about Solomon's reign is the building of the temple, and we have quite a number of chapters in which in great detail every aspect of the temple is described and built. And I'm sure as you were reading that section, you found, oh my gosh, I think just like we had the descriptions of the tabernacle earlier, these descriptions of the temple are very interesting. The important thing to notice is, though, that the likelihood of the tabernacle and the temple being likened to the Garden of Eden. We're going back and connecting that whole story as it comes forward. Well, what happens is, though, after Solomon does build the temple and we have that wonderful moment, we find that indeed the two kingdoms become separated. The northern kingdom, Israel, the southern kingdom is Judah. Then we begin to see the darker side of Solomon. He begins to marry foreign women, hundreds of them, in order to make alliances. And we find out that his image is somewhat darkened by that his attempt to do that. And that, however, as we're rolling along, brings us up to the point that we can introduce the prophets who are brought forth to get these kings on the straight path. And it's there that we stop reading the stories of David and Solomon, and we begin the story of the kings that follow. And then we're really well into the book of Kings. Now, the important thing also here is we meet for the first time one of the major prophets, Elijah. We meet Elijah. Elijah's sort of a wild man out in the desert, kind of living in a strange way, interesting sort of clothes. Of course, the interesting thing to us, particularly here during Advent season, is this is very much like a picture of John the Baptist. In fact, some people, when they saw John the Baptist, said, Elijah has come again. So that's of interest to us. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm transitioning over into a kind of preview. You've been reading up to there, and you've read that. Now you're going to be reading these stories, and I'm sort of overviewing them, previewing them now for you, because these stories of Elijah and then Elisha, his chosen follower, they are the ones that you're going to be reading the next week, and I'm just previewing them for you. And we meet the man Elijah, and what a strange person he is. But we have those wonderful stories to read. You'll read the story of his contest with the gods, with the prophets of Baal, and his victory and his ability to stop the famine and bring rain. And wow, what an exciting story that is. But the incidents are always the same. The kings that followed David and Solomon, whether kings in the north or kings in the south, Judah and Israel, they do the same thing. They chase after other gods. They're not faithful. they are disobedient, and they continue to spiral downward. Now, the writer of Kings really puts a sort of a evaluation test on all these kings. And he looks really for the same thing again and again. Are they following after the idea of being faithful to God? And are they staying with the commandments? And are they getting rid of idolatry? The northern kings, all you will see, fail in this. And so very quickly, the northern kingdom goes downhill, and eventually the Assyrians, you're going to see, come in, and they scatter and disperse what was the northern kingdom and its headquarters, which was Samaria. And that's where we find out where the Samaritans really come from. Then the attention is also back on the kings of Judah. Again, there's about 20 of them. There's about 20 in the north and about 20 in the south. Of the 20 in the north, none of them come up to the standard of evaluation that's put on them. Of the ones in the south, we have about 20, and about 8 of them pass some of the tests. But inevitably, the same thing happens to them. They are led into exile. In this case, they're led into exile by Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, and that's where they're taken captivity. Whereas the northern kingdom is essentially a scattered kingdom. So, in your reading that is in advance, in preview, you're going to be meeting these kings, and you're going to be disappointed in their performance, I'm sure, as you read them, as the evaluator seems to be in there, keeps saying that they did not do well. So keep up with your reading there, but be assured that as you see these stories, the northern kingdom stories and the southern kingdom stories, they're both going in the same direction. By the way, these histories are extremely well written. The writer, which would have been doing these after the Babylonian captivity, the writer interweaves these stories. He goes back and forth between the north and the south, and you can sort of keep track of those kings as they're going along there. And on the other hand, on the positive side, you will begin to meet Elijah and his follower, Elisha. So good luck with your reading of all these stories and enjoy them very much. I think it's interesting that the picture of Elijah is particularly interesting to us because he is so much like John the Baptist, or really John the Baptist is so much like him. Enjoy your reading, keep up the good work. Let's close with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this opportunity we have to read the Bible together and to work to be able to understand the wholeness of God's story from the Garden of Eden right up until the life of Christ. We thank you for your help in all that we do and say. This prayer we ask in your Son's name. Amen. Good day.